I was born in October 7th, 1952. I'm 67. I've lived all of my life in Monroe, Louisiana, except for college and law school, that 7-year period. And I've practiced law since 1977 in Monroe with the same law firm. I wanted to be a lawyer because my father was a lawyer, but when I was a young man learning to drive, my father, as I explained, had been somewhat incapacitated with polio, so I began to drive him around the country. I would take him from Monroe to Lake Providence. Learning to drive, he would sit in the right seat and guide me. I would be 14 or 15 years old. And when we'd get to Lake Providence, I would help him into the courtroom and I would watch his proceedings. And then we'd get in the car and drive to Tallulah and I'd watch some other meeting. And then we'd drive down to St. Joe, Louisiana, and I'd watch another meeting. And then we'd come back to Monroe. And as I grew older, he would send me on errands, run this over to Tallulah and get the signature of the judge on the papers. So I began to see more and more of the courtroom experience. I watched my father when he tried cases in Ouachita Parish. It was very interesting. I liked the thought process that went into it. I liked the orderliness of it. I liked the respect that the judge had for the lawyers and that the lawyers had for the judge. The fact that everybody was allowed to say his or her piece without interruption, that there was thoughtful deliberation and a debate over a subject and then a decision. I think early on I rode with him or drove him to the Court of Appeal in Shreveport and watched oral argument at the Court of Appeal. All of that appealed to me because of its sense of orderliness. Yes, 7 years. My mother had 6 children in very Catholic, very 1950s, and went on to put us all through parochial school. Jesus the Good Shepherd, which was founded in 1961, about 6 blocks from my home. Earlier I'd gone to another parochial school that was a little more distant, so I could ride my bike to school every day. And I went all the way through the 8th grade at that school. It was a small school. Our class sizes as we got older were probably only 20 students or so, taught by the nuns. And then I went to St. Frederick's High School that was actually named for a cousin of mine, and I had a great aunt who had donated some land to the school, to the diocese for the creation of a school. And it was a nice thing to be in a family like that. But summer of 1967, which was dubbed the Summer of Love, the Daughters of the Cross lost a number of members of the convent, and the school was struggling to find and fill teaching positions in late July and August. And my father made the decision at that point that we needed to transfer. And I think my sophomore year, I transferred to Neville, which is the city school in Monroe City High School, and later graduated from that. Growing up in Monroe was an ideal place to grow up, at least in the 1950s and 60s. And I cherished my childhood. I had opportunities to do whatever I wanted to do. I could ride my bicycle to the ballpark and ride home safely at night with my flashlight on it at 9 o'clock at night. And I was allowed free rein, and it was a safe environment. Parents would generally allow us to do those kinds of things. I could hunt, I could fish. I played a lot of tennis as I grew up and had really a great childhood. And for that reason, wanted to go back and raise my own family in Monroe. Early on, I was asked to draw a picture of what I wanted to be, and I drew a stick man in a blue cord suit and declared that I wanted to be a lawyer. And that was always the dream until I got to college and then got distracted by the thought of becoming an English teacher. But ultimately, sanity prevailed, and I decided to take the LSAT and was able to get into LSU Law School. I went to LSU for law school instead of Tulane, I think to my father's dismay, because he was a Tulanian back in those 1930 days when he didn't have much use for LSU. But being one of 6 children and having already gone through a private school, the cost was substantial to go to Tulane, and LSU was mighty cheap, as you'll recall, in the day. I think I paid $200 a semester for tuition at LSU in 1974. I'd gone to undergraduate school at a little Episcopal college in eastern Tennessee, the University of the South at Sewanee. It was a mostly male school, until, it was all male until the year before I arrived. I think there were 50 females there the year ahead of me and maybe another 75 in my class. So it was slim pickings for dates for freshmen, but it improved as time went by. It was a great place for me because it was a lot of reading, history, literature, poetry, and the opportunity to meet people who wrote, the opportunity to travel. I got to spend a couple of summers in England, and I thought that was just a fantastic experience for me. I was lucky enough to avoid having to serve in the military at a time when we were in war, but I was the last year of the college deferment. And so when I finished high school in '70, I did not have to go to the military. I was fully expecting to go when I graduated from college in '74, but by then the draft had all but ended, and I was not called up, and I was allowed to go to law school. I was not a happy student as a freshman. I did not enjoy the place. I was missing a lot of my companions from the East and other parts of the South who had gone on to other things. I'd left them behind when I left Tennessee. But after a year, I finally adapted, and I fell in love with LSU Law School, and particularly not just the people I met, the students that I became friends with, but the professors, people like Saul Litvinoff, Shelby McKenzie, Yiannopoulos, Cheney Joseph, Bill Crawford, Frank Monroe in particular. I shouldn't leave him out. People who wrote books that have served me all of my life in guiding me through this practice. It was a phenomenal place to go to school, and I'm deeply indebted to LSU Law School. My father in 1954, at the age of 39, after the birth of his first three children, had contracted polio. Very unusual. It was the last year of the polio epidemic. He was the chairman of the March of Dimes and president of the Chamber of Commerce in Monroe, and it was quite a blow. And he almost didn't survive, but he did, and he came out with the flesh pretty much decimated or taken away on his arms and legs. He was sort of a stick man after that. He had a great voice. He had good blue eyes and a great mind. He learned to walk again. He learned to maneuver alone, but he was always pretty severely handicapped. And by the time I was finishing law school, he was in his 60s, and I felt he needed some help. So I was anxious to get back and to practice with him. So I met my wife the night after the last exam, my freshman first semester. And we had a class party, and she attended with her sister, who was then dating a section mate. And I met Karen and worked up the courage to ask her out a few months later. I didn't have a car at law school, which was unusual for people down here. It's an automotive environment. And I had a bicycle, so I had to figure out somebody I could borrow a car from so I could ask her on a date. And my friend David Forrester had a car, so I was able to ask him for use of his 1957 Volvo so that I could take Karen on a date. And that's how we became a couple and moved on and married just a week before I took graduation from law school. I knew that she was interested in law. She's a really bright girl and had taken the LSAT in 1976 and had knocked the top off of it. I'd been given scholarship offers, but I told her I wanted to go to Monroe to work with Dad. Didn't think we could make it work with her going to 3 years of law school after that, and she made no complaint, came to Monroe, and she got her master's at the college in Monroe and taught English at the college as we began having children. We ultimately had 4 children. 2 years after the last one was born, she said, I don't think I'm cut out just to be a Monroe housewife. I'd like to look at either going to medical school or law school. So we talked about it, and she again took the LSAT and again knocked the top off of it. And we looked at places for her to go to college, to law school. And the only place she could go and still maintain our family in Monroe and the kids in school as they were was by driving every day to Jackson, Mississippi, to Mississippi College. Somewhere along the line early on, I was told that it was important to be involved in bar activities because that was one of the duties you had. I had no idea what I was getting involved in, but I started going to bar meetings and bar conventions. I enjoyed meeting the people. I particularly enjoyed the collegiality that it offered, and the opportunity to meet people that I would later find as my opponents or co-counsel in litigation. And it fostered, just that work fostered collegiality in the courtroom and outside the courtroom in the run-up to trials. I thought it was very important in my education, my experience, and my growth as a lawyer to spend time doing that. So I did more and more of it. Ultimately, I served on the Board of Governors in the early 1990s. I was asked to do it again for a 3-year term in the early part of the last decade. I was appointed by the Supreme Court. I thought another thing that my father had done that I thought was important was to grade bar exams. And he had been the writer of the federal courts bar exam in the 70s. I knew it was a lot of work, but I graded that exam for a number of years, and at some point I got appointed in the early 90s to be the writer of that exam and to prepare the questions, prepare the grade, the model exam questions, and to supervise the grading of the exam and to regrade all the failures and to meet in New Orleans with the bar examiners in the court to go over the exams. I found that a very rewarding experience. I particularly enjoyed procedure. I liked Frank Monroe and other professors at law school taught me basic civil procedure, federal and state. And it was a very important part of my education to learn how to do things right as you prepare a case for filing and as you move through the courts and to the Court of Appeal. So all of that led me ultimately to ask to be on the civil the Code of Civil Procedure Committee that Bill Forrester has headed, and I've enjoyed doing that for the last 10 or 12 years and was at such a meeting today. A flattering one was an invitation to join the American College of Trial Lawyers, which I did in 2001, and had an opportunity to meet some extraordinary lawyers from around the country. Ultimately, I served as state chair of that committee, and then recently I finished a 4-year term as regent for a 4-state area for that association, which required me to go to many different local bar meetings at different states and to all of these national meetings on a regular basis. Again, the collegiality and the opportunity to spend time with other lawyers was rewarding. As a practicing lawyer, I hope I'm remembered as somebody that did what he could to advance the professionalism of the association and the collegiality of people that are engaged in dispute resolution. So often when you're in a courtroom, so often when you're in a case, tempers run high. I can't say that mine have never done that, but I hope for the most part that I have been a calming influence on people who have emotional outbursts in the tough times of their litigation. And I hope that I'm recalled as a lawyer who is of professional stature, who was able to teach younger people how to properly not just present a trial, but to hold themselves in dealing with dispute.